All right, welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into some uh, really critical material you've shared today, all focused on keeping your brain working its best.
Absolutely. Sharp, protected, not just now, but, for the long haul.
Because our brains, they run the whole show, right? Everything from moving to thinking,
Yeah,
like you're doing right now listening to us.
exactly. But the modern world throws a lot of challenges at the brain's main defense system.
And that's the barrera hematoencephalica, the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah.
Like the brain's bouncer, yeah. Super selective.
Spot on. A filter, keeping out toxins, nasty stuff in the blood, only letting the good things through.
But the problem is, this barrier can get damaged.
Precisely. And when it's compromised, substances that shouldn't be there get in. It's not like an instant disaster, but it builds up.
Cumulative damage.
Yes, cumulative damage. Over time, this constant low-level exposure degrades brain function, and it really adds up, contributing to those long-term cognitive problems.
So our mission here is to unpack how this vital barrier gets weakened based on your sources, and importantly, what simple steps, practical things we can actually do to protect it.
Let's get into it. The sources show that while the brain's tough, its shield is vulnerable to stuff we encounter every day.
Modern life stuff.
Yeah, lifestyle, diet,
Yeah.
it all chips away at the barrier's integrity, and that's how unwanted things get in, leading eventually, potentially decades later, to issues like dementia.
Okay, let's tackle the first big factor your sources highlight. Something essential. Sleep.
Right. Sleep deprivation. It's presented as a direct hit to the blood-brain barrier.
A direct hit. How so?
Well, the material mentions studies, even some interesting ones with rats, showing that just not getting enough sleep can actually cause a rupture, a physical break.
Wow, it can physically break just from being tired. That's pretty stark.
It is. And it's not just the rupture. Poor sleep also messes with transporting nutrients across the barrier, things the brain needs.
Okay.
And it slows down communication between your neurons.
So wait, let me get this straight. Potential toxins getting in, plus less fuel delivery and slower brain signals.
That's the picture, yeah. A kind of triple whammy. The brain just isn't as efficient.
So what's the solution presented?
Improve sleep quality. If you absolutely can't get more hours, you need to focus on making the hours you do get count. Maximize that deep sleep.
Because deep sleep is when the repair happens.
That's when the brain and tissues really regenerate, yes. So quality, especially deep sleep, is non-negotiable for barrier health.
Got it. Okay, moving on. Another common one, alcohol.
Alcohol causes damage partly by creating reactive oxygen species.
Reactive oxygen species.
Right.
Like tiny metabolic sparks causing trouble.
Good analogy. Little molecular troublemakers. And the key thing for the barrier is these ROS, they help something called acetaldehyde cross into the brain.
Acetaldehyde. Isn't that the hangover culprit?
That's what the material suggests, yeah. It gets into the brain, contributes to those rough next day feelings.
But it's more than just the hangover, right?
Oh, definitely. Repeatedly letting that happen because alcohol weakened the barrier. Well, that's a pattern of low-level assault. It's suggesting you understand your body's limits to minimize this specific damage pathway. It's not necessarily zero tolerance for everyone, but being aware.
So the hangover is kind of a warning sign. The barrier might have been breached by that specific compound.
Okay. Number 3, high blood pressure.
Right. High pressure directly stresses those tiny, delicate blood vessels in the brain.
And that stress on the vessels, how does that break the barrier itself?
The material indicates this physical stress physically damages the vessel walls, leading to a rupture of the barrier. Things leak out that shouldn't.
Leaking into the brain tissue.
Exactly. And this is linked to long-term toxin buildup. Maybe you don't see the effects for like 20 years,
Yeah.
but it contributes to cognitive decline down the road. It's damage on top of the usual risks of high blood pressure, like stroke.
Ah, okay. So the high pressure isn't just a separate risk factor. It's actively degrading the brain's defenses over time. Makes keeping blood pressure normal seem even more critical. Absolutely. And while your sources mention, the ongoing debates about salt and cholesterol, the direct link between high pressure and barrier rupture is really emphasized here.
Okay, factor 4, inflammation. And your sources zoom in on something called homocysteine.
Yeah, inflammation's a big topic, but homocysteine gets flagged as a specific marker, particularly bad for the brain's blood vessels.
What makes homocysteine levels go up?
Several things mention genetics, maybe kidney or liver function, but the sources focus on 2 common reasons. Either eating too many animal products leading to high levels of things called oxystrol.
Oxystrols,
Yeah.
like oxidized cholesterol.
Basically, yeah. often higher in fried or heavily processed animal foods. Or the other main cause is actually a lack of certain B vitamins,
Which,
specifically B12, B9, that's folate, and B6.
huh. So too much of one thing or too little of another, both related to animal products or the nutrients in them. That's
Yeah,
tricky.
it really highlights nutritional balance, doesn't it? But here's a kicker from your source. It stresses that even having B12 levels considered just low normal on a blood test dramatically increases your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's compared to having optimal levels.
Wait, say that again? Low normal is still a significant risk, not just clinical deficiency.
That's the point made. It suggests we should maybe rethink what normal means for brain health. Aiming for optimal B12 seems key.
That really reframes how you'd look at a standard blood test. So
Mhm.
checking levels, aiming high normal or optimal, maybe supplementing. That's a concrete action.
Very much so. It's a clear takeaway.
All right, factor 5 takes us somewhere fascinating. The gut, the second brain.
Yeah, the gut-brain axis is huge. And your sources draw this really interesting parallel. They say, think about leaky gut intestinal permeability, like leaky blood-brain barrier.
One affects the other.
The idea is that what gets through the gut lining or the inflammatory signals generated there can impact the brain barrier's permeability too.
There was a study, a rat study.
Yes, a really compelling one described. They took gut bacteria from healthy rats, rats with an intact barrier, and transplanted it into rats with a damaged barrier, and it
Ugh.
helped regenerate the blood-brain barrier in the damaged rats.
That's incredible. Gut bacteria helping fix the brain's defenses. So how do we help our gut bacteria do that?
The focus in your material isn't so much on probiotics, though they might help. It's more on feeding the good bacteria you already have. Prebiotics.
Food for the bacteria.
Exactly. Fiber that boosts diversity. Inulin powder gets a specific mention as being very effective for this. Fermented foods can help too, if you tolerate them well.
And this helps with inflammation again.
Yes, it ties back neatly. Healthy gut bugs reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. If those cytokines get too high, they can cross the barrier, mess with the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic system.
Ah, the relaxation system.
Right. And that creates a nasty cycle. Inflammation affects the nerve, slows digestion, you don't relax properly, maybe gives allergens more time to cause trouble in the gut, leading to more inflammation. Feeding your gut bacteria helps break that cycle.
Which leads us smoothly into factor 6, the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system itself.
Right. Stimulating this nerve is framed as a powerful way to keep the brain healthier.
What kind of benefits are we talking about?
Well, the list is pretty long. Regulating neuron activity, improving nutrient and oxygen uptake by neurons and those support cells, the glial cells,
Glial cells. Yeah.
better oxygen distribution in the brain, and even better sleep quality. Ties back to factor 1.
Okay, all vital. And how do we stimulate it? Your sources gave practical tips.
Yeah, some short-term things you can do daily. Specific breathing exercises, gargling vigorously,
Really?
apparently, and dunking your face in cold water. For longer-term effects, things like regular meditation, consistent cold showers. The source also hinted at other throat stimulations that they couldn't explicitly name.
Interesting. Okay, so breathing, gargling, cold face splash for quick boosts, meditation, cold showers for the long game. Got it. Factor 7, blood sugar swings.
Yes, specifically rapid spikes from high glycemic index foods. Those are singled out as really detrimental.
Why are those quick sugar surges so bad for the barrier?
Two main reasons given. First, they cause an immediate spike in blood pressure, and we already know that's bad for the vessels and barrier.
Okay.
Second, they cause chaotic, excessive firing of neurons in the brain, like an electrical storm.
So physical stress from pressure and functional chaos from the neurons going haywire.
Exactly. It's a bad combo. Leads to more inflammation, higher pressure, neuronal overexcitement, a cycle you want to avoid repeating constantly.
So the fix is pretty obvious then.
Stable blood sugar. Avoid the roller coaster. Aim for steady levels all day. The source specifically calls out things like pasta, bread, sweets. Using a glycemic index table to pick lower GI foods is suggested.
Makes sense. Now, factor 8 is maybe a surprise. Caffeine.
Yeah, caffeine often gets mixed press, right? Linked to anxiety sometimes. But your sources connect it to longevity markers in studies.
And the brain barrier connection, how does that work?
It works through a pathway called AMPK, related to cellular aging. But specifically in the brain, caffeine boosts something called cyclic AMP, or CMP.
CVMP. What does that do for the barrier?
According to the material, two main things. It reduces brain inflammation, and this is key. It actually strengthens the tight junctions between the cells making up the blood-brain barrier.
It physically tightens the connections.
That's the idea. Makes the barrier less leaky, more resistant to rupture.
Wow, I was not expecting that. So caffeine, in this context, could actually be protective for the barrier structure. That flips the usual narrative.
It shows how complex these interactions are, doesn't it?
Definitely. Okay, factor 9, lipopolysaccharides, LPS, and fats.
Right, LPS, described as these harmful, often fatty or sugary molecules, toxic to neurons.
Toxic how? What do they do to the barrier?
Causing barrier rupture is one of their main effects. Your sources even mention scientists use LPS in rats specifically to cause brain inflammation and depression so they can test antidepressants.
Yikes. That tells you how bad they are if they use them to induce problems.
Mhm.
How do dietary fats play into this?
Well, the material notes that extremely high saturated fat diets, like over 40% of calories, which is a lot,
Very high, yeah.
those can increase barrier permeability. But the countermeasure suggested is actually to increase your intake of healthy fats.
To balance things out.
Exactly. Healthy fats are vital for neurons anyway, and they can help modulate some of those inflammatory pathways that LPS or too much unhealthy fat might trigger.
Okay, last main factor, number 10. Thermogenesis and cold exposure.
Yeah, this revisits the cold theme. It contrasts old ways of treating brain injury, like just resting, with newer ideas about improving oxygen efficiency.
And cold is the key.
Cold showers, cold water immersion again. The mechanism described involves pairing cold exposure with breathing exercises that raise your CO2 levels slightly.
Cold plus CO2. What does that trigger?
A big boost in nitric oxide production.
Nitric oxide. That opens up blood vessels, right?
Precisely, it's a vasodilator. So more blood flow, more oxygen gets to the brain. This helps cells, including neurons, live longer, and it also seems to boost immune function.
So it's a direct route to better brain oxygenation, and that cold face plunge comes up again.
It does, highlighted as a really practical way to hit multiple targets, stimulate the vagus nerve and parasympathetic system, helps regulate hunger, helps normalize blood pressure, kind of an all-rounder.
That is a lot of factors impacting this barrier. It's quite interconnected. Your sources also touched on supplements.
They did, yeah, as potential long-term support. Though there was a sense that if you really nail the 10 lifestyle factors, the supplements might be less critical, but they can help fill gaps.
Which ones came up?
B vitamins, again, especially B12 if you're low, reinforcing that point about checking levels. Magnesium, too, for relaxation and blood pressure.
Any specific type of magnesium?
It mentioned different forms, and magnesium L-threonate was noted as being particularly good for getting into the brain, but maybe harder to find. The advice was clear, though. Only take it if you're actually low or have symptoms.
Okay. What about others, like curcumin or omega-3?
Yes, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega-3, specifically the DHA type, were all listed as beneficial.
And how do they help the barrier specifically? Was there a mechanism mentioned?
Yes, and this is really fascinating. Your sources say these three, curcumin, resveratrol, omega-3 DHA, they all work by inhibiting an enzyme called MMP9.
MMP9. What's its job?
It's involved in tissue breakdown and remodeling, but when the barrier is damaged or inflamed, MMP9 can get overactive and actually start destroying the barrier tissue itself. These supplements help put the brakes on that destructive process.
Well, that's specific.
Yeah.
They stop the demolition crew from going too far when there's damage. And omega-3 had a special mention.
It did. The material suggested that taking omega-3 could offer significant brain protection, even if someone struggles with some of the other lifestyle steps, like a strong safety net for the brain's structure.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. The core message from everything you've shared seems incredibly clear. Protecting that barrera hematoencephalica, that blood-brain barrier, it's just fundamental.
It really is fundamental for keeping your brain working well long-term, avoiding cognitive decline, avoiding disease. It's the brain's front line.
In our daily choices, they're either building it up or tearing it down little by little.
Exactly. But the good news, as we saw, is that there are clear, actionable things you can do across sleep, diet, stress, even temperature. You have levers you can pull.
It doesn't have to be overwhelming, right? You can look at this list, these 10 factors, the supplements, and maybe pick one or two areas that feel most relevant or achievable for you to start with.
Absolutely. Start somewhere. And maybe the final thought to leave people with, drawing this all together. Think about how interconnected it all is. Your sleep impacts your gut, which impacts inflammation, which impacts your stress response, which impacts your barrier.
It's all linked?
It's all linked. And your sources really drive home that these seemingly small daily choices, they accumulate over decades. They are literally shaping the physical structure protecting your brain, and therefore shaping your cognitive future. How much attention are you paying to building that foundation today for the you of tomorrow?